Hey everybody, so I'm doing a bit of a different video this week where I'm going to be breaking down my tournament as it's happening. So right now I am currently in the process of preparing for Ka0s Treasure Series 6. I believe it's number 6. It's the Ka0s Treasure Series today. It is August 19th, 2023. The tournament starts in about 30 minutes and I'm just sitting here getting ready for the tournament. I had just finished leaving up my deck in classic Ian fashion, and yeah, I'm getting ready for the tournament. Have everything all prepped up and ready to go. This is before round one. We haven't even done the players meeting, anything like that. So what I'm going to be doing for this video is, as I'm going through, I'm going to be breaking down what happened in the last round that I played. You may see me have to do like a double up, because there's situations where I've had this happen before where I sit down for a round of Magic, it goes to time, and then the next round starts immediately, or I have enough time to like literally eat a bite of food and then go into the next round. But hopefully I'll have a little bit of time, couple minutes between each round, to kind of go over what happened, break everything down, and then hopefully my editor can put up some card images right here as I'm going through stuff, and we can talk about some of these decks. So yeah, today I decided to bring a deck that I haven't played in a little while. It's a deck that I am a big fan of and that no one really seems to care about in cEDH, which is really cool. That it's a deck that I think is pretty underexplored. So I'm bringing today, and I'll probably have a nicer version of these up here, but I'm bringing Malcolm and Ka0s. So this is a bit of a strange Malcolm deck, but it's probably my favorite Malcolm deck. The idea is that because Malcolm triggers when pirates deal damage and not combat damage, that every time you swing in with Malcolm, if you have Ka0s in the battlefield, it's making 3 treasures. So kind of a basic concept behind the commanders, right? Malcolm's very efficient, really good at what it does, but with Ka0s, it becomes like really silly how much mana you can make every single turn, right? So the idea is to try and get like basically a turn 1 Malcolm, turn 2 Ka0s scenario every single game, and then pump it into a bunch of different spells. I think like the One Ring was a really good pickup for this deck, just because it's a really cheap artifact that you can play, because the deck doesn't lack mana, it lacks card advantage. So like a lot of the 99 is just like, oh well, you have a stupid amount of mana, play this big thing that gives you card advantage but doesn't really get you any mana, right? So that's kind of the idea of the deck. Obviously there's Glinthorn Buccaneer combos, the classic lines with those. We got some dual caster Heat Shimmer lines. I don't play Twin Flame and play Heat Shimmer because I like Heat Shimmer more in general. I find it has more general utility. And then I'm also playing some Curiosity lines with Niv Mizzet. It's really easy to get Niv Mizzet in this deck. It's one of the easiest decks to cast Niv Mizzet because you're making 3 treasures every combat. So a lot of the time what you can do is like hold up mana, go to combat, next turn untap, do the same thing, and then you have like 6 treasures plus some mana to be able to cast spells and stuff like that into your Niv Mizzet. Step through is one of the easiest ways to go grab your Niv Mizzet out of your deck as well. It also can grab your dual caster, so it has a lot of utility there. But yeah, it's like a really cool good stuff make big mana deck with obviously a 1 card combo with the commander, and then sort of this just general grindy mid-range plan. We're not on breach lines just because they're impossible to assemble in Izzet. You basically like have to muddle the mixture for Underworld Breach, and even then it's still not like exciting or good. So that's the idea behind all of that. I hope everyone enjoys this video. If you guys like videos like this, if you want me to do more stuff like this while I'm going through tournaments, please let me know, because this is the kind of feedback I like. So hit that like button, that subscribe button, leave comments below. Let me know if you like this stuff. Obligatory, hey, if I do well in this tournament, it means that maybe you should consider some cEDH coaching. You can check me out on ComedIanMTG@gmail.com, Patreon, Discord, all of the places. You can find me on Twitter if you want to DM me about this stuff. Feel free to hit me up. But yeah, I'm really excited about this video. I'm really excited about this deck. It's one that I'm just in generally very happy to play. It's Izzet is my favorite color combo, so we'll see what happens, and we'll catch you after round 1. So reporting back after round 1, it was a really crazy game. So Najeela had turn 1. This is Najeela going forth. They had Najeela and Samit on turn 1, swinging in for drawing 2 cards. So they kind of got ahead of the game real quick. Then Kinnan, who was in seat 1, they were able to play an early Seaborn Muse. We had a Krark Sakashima on seat 2. I was in seat 3 with my Malcolm Ka0s list, and they kept this hand that was like down to 5. They sort of just like, I'm gonna Jewel Lotus play my game, and like barely got through the game. So Najeela gets this crazy start. We're all like, oh my god, how do we answer Najeela? Meanwhile, my hand is Mana Vaults, 2 lands, Glenhorn Buccaneer, and a couple counter spells, right? So I'm like, okay, cool. I have Glinthorn and I have counter spells to back it up too, right? So I'm feeling pretty decent about that. And I know I go for a turn 3 win, or I can slow roll it, get some counter spells, stuff like that. And basically, we just went to time. We drew the round, and we drew it with Kinnan having lethal attackers on board. It was kind of a crazy game. Basically, it ended up a scenario where Najeela couldn't go off because Kinnan had a spell skite, but that also put a lot of pressure on Kinnan's life total. But they were flipping over, and their first flip with Kinnan was Nyx Bloom Ancient, which like should have been game over. But we were just like hacking away at their legs for basically the rest of the match and doing everything we could to not lose to Kinnan, who was like in a clearly dominant position. He was activating Kinnan a lot on upkeep, which for some of the turns made a lot of sense, and for other ones it felt like he was letting himself tap out so that other people could get away with stuff. Realizing later on in the game he was on much more of like Hire's traditional like Lodestone Golem Glenelendra style build with the Thorn of Amethyst. I feel like that play pattern makes just like a little bit more sense than I previously thought, but even so, we were able to draw into the game. I had one opportunity because a coma hit the field, which was the only thing keeping me from winning. There was actually like no more stack interaction. Like I was able to like go for a win with double protection, but coma hit the field, which is able to tap down Glenthorn before it can get into combat. So meanwhile, once again, I'm sitting there with this, we do go to time, but it's 80 minutes and I've had a win condition in my hand this entire time. I look super far behind, and I get a reality chip on board and a Rhystic Study, and at some point I flip into Final Fortune being the top card of my library. I'm able to cast the Final Fortune, go for it, because the coma had been, all of like the coma serpents had been sacked to tap down the Najeela player's land, so he couldn't keep going after Kinnan. And I had one opportunity, and he single target psych rifts my Malcolm so that I'm exactly 1 mana short of being able to win the game, which was pretty heartbreaking. So I died to my own Final Fortune with I think like 3 minutes left in the game, if that, maybe. And then Kinnan goes and takes their turn, kills the Najeela, and Krark-Sakshima takes just long enough on their turn to hit time. And we had called the judge just so we could make sure that it was all like it was clearly not slow play, right? The judge sat there, they said everything was good, and then we hit the 0 mark, and the game ended up being a draw with Kinnan having basically lethal attackers on board. So it was an interesting game for sure. I don't love starting with a draw, but I like it better than starting with a loss. So I'll take one of those, and hopefully we can get a W in the next round. So the end of round 2 is where we're at, and I unfortunately drew again. So I need 2 wins probably to secure my spot in the top 16. It was a crazy game. We played against Liberator, who played like land, Mana Crypt, Manifold Key, Voltaic Key, and then next turn played the One Ring. So they were like untapping and drawing like 7 and then 12 and then 11 cards, or not in that order, but they drew a ridiculous amount of cards. And the rest of the game was so it started with Liberator, Urza's Battlethopter going first with that insane hand. Then it was me. I mulled 5, so I kept a really just mid hand where I just turned 1 Casket, turn 2 Malcolm. Eventually I got Niv Mizzet down, but he barely drew me a bunch of cards because Liberator was the one popping off and they were only playing artifacts, not instants and sorceries. Next to me was Temujin, who's top 16 bunch of events recently, playing Tivit and using their Tivit list to just keep farming value. They basically had an insane start, got a turn 2 Tivit, and then sort of fizzled as the game went on. Also, we were like on the back foot a lot. There were definitely a lot of opportunities had he drawn like a single tutor to probably turn the corner and win the game, but he didn't end up getting there. And then in 4th spot, we had a player playing Commodore Guff Polymorph, which is pretty cool. It's really cool to like talk about that on the Mind Sculptors and then see it a week later, basically, or I guess 2 weeks later after we recorded that episode. But it was pretty cool to see that deck, and that deck was shut out pretty early because Guff got revokered by the Liberator deck. So it was a crazy game. I was really starting off on the back foot, even though I was in 2nd spot. I was, mulling to 5 and keeping like the slowest of hands and like barely drawing any cards. The last turn of the game, I attempted a win with Glinthorn Buccaneer. I was able to transmute artifact one of my treasures, or my Chromox actually. And I was able to transmute artifact it into a defense grid to go for a Glinthorn Buccaneer. The unfortunate part about that was Temujin had exactly enough mana to pact it through defense grid, which was tough. But by the time all of that ended up resolving, by the time we fought all through all those things, I couldn't defense grid, get the Buccaneer win. But what I did get was a loss to a pact. So we drew again because my turn, as I said, where I tried to go for it was the last turn of the game. And yeah, so I'm starting off with 2 draws, which is not normally my my expertise in these tournaments. I'm not usually a go-to-time guy, but these matches have been like a factor of like, I'm going for the win when it's my appropriate window. I'm doing my best to get there. But I've had 2 matches in a row where one of my opponents just had like insane starts, like not even like crazy starts, not even like a really good start, just like insane, unbelievable starts. So it's just kind of frustrating to feel like I'm starting both these matches in the back foot. So hopefully round 3 gives me a little bit of a break, and I'm glad obviously with these insane starts that we haven't lost to these opponents, right? They've just been pulled out into a draw. And as I said, I still think 2 wins with 2 draws will be able to get me in there. So hoping I can get 2 wins in the next couple rounds. So I'm interrupting you right now between rounds 2 and rounds 3 because there's been some interesting developments since the time of this initial recording. So as I mentioned in my initial summary in the beginning of this video, I was recording this the day of this tournament, and if you notice those last 2 rounds, I talked about how 2 players had extremely insane openers from this tournament, how their opening hands were just absolutely off the charts, and how they had these crazy starts, one being a turn 1 Najila and turn 1 Samet in round 1 from Big TP, and the second one being Derek Owens playing that Liberator Urza's Battlethopter deck, going with the turn 1 Mana Crypt into Manifold Key, Voltaic Key, and then turn 2 One Ring. And the reason that these decks did have such insane starts is it turns out both of these players were caught to be cheaters. So I had the misfortune of playing them round 1 and round 2 of this tournament, which kind of sucks. Kind of sucks that they were doing it in the first place. And it's a little awkward that I happened to get paired one after the other against the 2 caught cheaters from this tournament. So it's tough stuff. Thank goodness for the community, people who put in the work to catch these people. I know Freedom Waffle and Memo had a lot to do with catching these cheaters in these tournaments, and I believe they both have received life bans from Ka0s tournaments. So as I said, about a couple days after this tournament happened, and we found out that these 2 players were caught cheating in it. So sucks that this happened. I love that they are showing no mercy when these things are happening, and we are giving these players life bans because as a community, it's good to get ahead of this stuff. It sucks when a player cheating can ruin a tournament. I was lucky enough that the players in my pods were able to gang up on these players, and we actually ended up drawing both of those games as opposed to just losing to these, insane starters. Yeah, it was kind of crazy stuff, and I figured this was a very relevant development after the start of this tournament to find out that my first 2 rounds were tarnished by players cheating in the match. So thought y'all would enjoy that update. Let's go back to the day of and my summary from round 3. So round 3 was a bit of a toughie. Ended up losing to Atraxa. Basically, Atraxa went first, Vanifar went second, I went third, and in fourth was Kinnan. The game was a little bit swingy all around. I had a pretty good start where it flashed in a Spectral Sailor in pretty early, was able to start cracking in with Malcolm, played Ka0s early, and then I got Professional Facebreaker. So I started to make a bunch of treasures for turn. I was doing a lot of stuff, and I got an early Wandering Archaic down. But then a lot of the game became about treating me as the threat, even though I wasn't actually presenting wins. I just had a good engine online. And it got to the point where Atraxa started to build up, and I kept going, Atraxa's building resources, like let's start focusing on them. And a lot of the interaction was used to make it so that the Vanifar player was like holding up interaction, not developing their board, and kept interacting with things that are happening on the stack. And eventually the game got to a point where they decided to single target Cyclonic Rift my Malcolm because I had paired it with a Tandem Lookout so that I couldn't draw 2 cards and make some extra treasures, even though Kinnan had a One Ring that was already on 1 and probably about 8 mana, and Atraxa had about 6+ mana on Smothering Tithe and a Jeweled Lotus on the field and a Mana Crypt and like a bunch of other stuff. And I was explaining that I had a decent board, but I wasn't presenting wins, whereas the other 2 had the potential to untap and present a win, if not untap and present a dominant board state because my deck isn't as explosive as theirs. Then it just didn't end up working out that way. So single target Cyclonic was casting my stuff. I bounced their Smothering Tithe, but then that got countered and no one helped me fight over it. And then Kinnan tapped all of their mana on their turn to get the Seedborn Muse down so they could start doing the double Seedborn Muse and the One Ring and activating Kinnan at the same time. But they had almost no interaction. So when they went to Atrax's turn, they went to Psych Rift on upkeep. I was forced to interact with it, and then I did counter it, and Atraxa untapped and won. So it was a tough game because I called out exactly what was going to happen, that we were going to lose the game through letting Atraxa basically win if they kept overreacting to what I was doing, which stunk because then that's exactly how the game ended. So that one was tough. I'm not gonna lie. It was the roughest round of the day, I would say, just because it was a game where I had a decent start, my deck was doing the thing, but it wasn't allowing me to actually go for the win, and everyone was treating me like I was actually winning, even though I was just like doing good stuff, right? Like if I was a blue farm deck and I had as much mana as I did, then it would be one thing entirely, right? But my deck is all about making it a lot of treasures, right? So it was just doing what it's supposed to do, and just because I wasn't turning the corner at the right time, everyone was still treating it like I was about to win, and despite how many times I would explain what was happening on my board state, it just didn't really matter. So it was a tough game, and I'm hoping to bounce back. I'm at 0-1-2 right now, 1 loss, 2 draws, so I can win out, or I can leave early and grab a drink today. So we'll see what happens, and I'm hoping to win with it, because it feels like I'm playing well, and it feels like the deck is doing at least okay, and I'm a little disappointed by how the games have gone given all of that. So we'll see what happens next. Okay, so round 4, I am crawling my way up from the precipice of despair. I won going 4th, which is stressful. So in first was LJ with Edric. So those don't know, LJ's been playing Edric for since the time began with cEDH, and just a really good player. Really enjoy playing with them. Then in second spot was Prosper, and then Kazur Ukima, then myself. We all were on that like lost one game, riding a bunch of draws bracket. So basically, game went out. So I had to mull kind of low to a hand that was just like turn 1 Malcolm and then like just Sensei's Top as far as like payoffs for all of my mana. And Sensei's Top was just digging me into just hot garbage. Like it was just nothing. I had Narset, which was awesome. But LJ first with Edric was obviously extremely incentivized to kill Narset immediately. So I played Narset, got 1 trigger off of it. The 1 activated ability I got off of it made me tuck away a Drift of Phantasms, which could have gotten me my Glinthorn Buccaneer. And I had like used Sensei's Top to like check the top 3 of my library like 4 or 5 times. And this one time I didn't check it. It was the bottom card of that pile. And I was like, okay, well, there goes an easy win that I just lost. So that was tough to just immediately end up in that position. I feel like Sensei's Top is that one card where the one time I don't activate it, I always screw it up. So it's a very difficult card. But yeah, so I'm doing the Sensei's Top digging, all of that nonsense. LJ kind of plays his turn, does a couple things, starts playing Edric, hits a couple cards in here and there. I'm doing a little bit of chipping in, but then Prosper is starting to do stuff. He goes and plays a Defense Grid, and this is where things get interesting. So Defense Grid on the stack, I go to resculpt his Prosper, which was really helpful, but it was also a weird situation where I had 3 mana and the Kazuro Kima player also had 3 mana. So we could interact with free spells during the Defense Grid turn. LJ, who had Edric up, was completely tapped out. So in response to the Defense Grid, in response to the resculpt targeting Prosper, Prosper exiles the Edric, I think just to get rid of like Fierce Guardianships and stuff like that. So this is all happening, a little bit of back and forth, a little bit of this and that. And eventually we get to a point where this Defense Grid resolves. A couple things have been exiled. We're kind of looking at this board, and he starts assembling just this like pile of value. We're not really sure where he's going with it because he's had a Facebreaker and Prosper for a little bit, but Prosper is obviously gone now, right? So he's not just like no nonsense popping off, right? So Prosper was a good hit with that resculpt, it turns out. And then he eventually gets a Breach down. And it's not like a Breach where there's like a grinding station, and obviously it's Prosper, so there's no Brain Freeze or anything like that. He doesn't have any 0 mana rocks, but what he does have is a decent amount of treasures and a Wheel of Fortune. So he jams a wheel, and we all start wheeling. And then this cycle comes out where every time we wheel, I and the Kazuro Kima player still have 3 mana open. So he knows that he still, even though he's under Defense Grid, can wheel us into free interaction. And this ended up becoming like a really interesting thing. So we end up wheeling like 4 or 5 times. He ends up getting to a point where he gets a Demonic Tutor. Demonic Tutors go grab LED, and then Kazuro Kima hits him with a Pact. And it was like, okay, I still have the potential to flip again into a wheel, into free interaction. A lot of stuff happens at this point. A lot of back and forth, a lot of interaction, kind of craziness. Eventually, he wheels one last time, runs out of mana because he's just like doing the thing where he's sculpting like 1 card at a time, and he's not assembling a win with this Wheel of Fortune stuff because the well-timed pack by Kazuro Kima. So eventually the Defense Grid stays, and then they go to their next to pass the turn with the defense grid up because they have no way of getting rid of it. It goes to ComedIan's turn. They can't really go for a win because they have to pay for the pack trigger. They have 6 mana remaining before a land drop, right? So they tap 5 of their 6 mana, play 2 mana dorks, and play a land and a mana dork, like all that, right? Pass to me. I don't have a win. Actually, ComedIan, funny enough, flips over Jace Vryn's Prodigy and minuses the attack of my Malcolm. So it has 0 power, meaning that it can't do any combat damage and it can't make any treasures. So I'm still stuck with those 3 treasures on board, which is important for this next part. So I have this hand. It has a Psych Rift, it has a Remora, it has a couple other value pieces of Final Fortune. I'm just like, I can't win with this hand, right? And the defense grid's still on, don't get me wrong. So my plan was like, okay, maybe I'll drop the Remora and I'll Psych Rift and they can't do anything and everyone will be set back to the Stone Age because these all are a lot of permanent base deck, right? Because Urukima has a bunch of mana rocks, they have a bunch of mana dorks. Edric is all little flying dorks, and Prosper has a bunch of little mana rocks on the board. Like everyone will be set back to the Stone Age. But then I top deck Magda. And what Magda allows me to do is if I get to 5, I go get Niv Mizzet and I have a Curiosity in my hand. So I'm looking around and I'm like, but Malcolm has no power, but I have a Ragavan in hand. So what I do is I go, okay, I got to get Ragavan in. Everyone's got blockers. So instead I say, the hell with my backup plan. I'm going to Sigil target Cyclonic Rift, bounce Edric's only blocker. I send in Ragavan, I dash it, send it in, get exactly 5 treasures. I have a little bit left over. I go, okay, I'm going to cast this Final Fortune, go to my next turn. And I have Magda, I have 5 treasures, and I forgot to activate the Magda so that I could get Niv so that it could go and swing in for combat damage. I messed up here because I'm looking at my hand now and I have no instants, I have no sorcery. So I'm on a Final Fortune turn too, right? So it's not like I can just pass and as soon as someone casts instant sorcery, I win the game, right? It's like I messed up. But I basically had to get a way to draw a card or an instant or sorcery to be able to win the game on my Final Fortune turn. So I untap, I get my Niv, I put the Curiosity on it, but luckily my draw for turn was a Fiery Islet. So I play it as my land for turn and I crack it and I'm able to draw and start the Curiosity loop and win the game. So it was a crazy round. There was like 6 or 7 ways. I mean, I almost messed it up literally at the very end there, even though I was protected by defense grid and had Final Fortune and all that. So it was a crazy game, craziest round of the day for sure. And now I am once again on another win in to try and get to top 16 because if I get 2-1-2, there's no way I don't make it. So that's where we're at. See y'all after round 5. Wow. Today is comeback day. I actually can't believe it. So right now I am 2-1-2, which is 12 points, which I will eat a shoe if that does not get me top 16. Going from 2 draws to start, being in the loser bracket, having to ride myself up the 2-1-2 to make this top 16 feels awesome. I'm not officially confirmed in right now, but if you see another video where I look very sad right after this one, you'll know that for some reason I didn't get in. But yeah, 2-1-2 feels really good. It's been a slog of a day. The deck finally overperformed this round, which is awesome because the first 3 games the first 2 games you kind of heard I was on an uphill battle for those games, starting with like the turn 1 Najeela plus Salmon or the turn 2 multiple untappers with 1 ring decks were kind of crazy. Luckily those went to time, and then taking that tough loss on round 3, I wasn't sure I was gonna be able to scrap it out, but this game I had a crazy opening hand. So turn 1 was Tivit, then it was me on turn 2, and then in third was Ikra Krom farm, and then in last was Tremnek, who's a multiple-time blue farm champion who was also playing blue farm. And so Tremnek mulled down to 4, but the other 2 kept 7s. So Tivit kind of had this start with the Soul Ring, and then they had this pivotal turn 2 where they had to choose between Gilded Draking my Malcolm or Gilded Draking the Krom for value. And it was like this tense moment where I was really concerned they were going to take Malcolm. I had a Lightning Bolt in hand, so it wasn't going to be the biggest thing in the world, but obviously I would rather not lose my Malcolm that early, right? So what happened was I had a crazy opener. I had Chrome Mox that I put a blue card under, and the hand was weird because I didn't actually have any red mana sources except for a Lotus Petal, but I had Magus of the Moon in hand, so I knew as soon as that came out, I would be able to fix my mana for red and then have a blue card under Chrome Mox. So I put a Resculpt under Chrome Mox, I had a Mana Crypt, I played the backside of Seagate Restoration, which I actually sandbagged at the very end because I was still deciding whether I wanted to keep it in hand and just have it for card advantage later, but I top decked on turn 1 a Ponder, so that helped me make my decision a little easier, right? So I threw the Resculpt into the Chrome Mox, had the Mana Crypt, played Malcolm, played the Lotus Petal, had an Offer You Can't Refuse in my hand, and I cast that Ponder. And luckily, in my top 3 was an Imperial Recruiter. So I knew I had a win con going into a later turn. Game goes on for 1 rotation on the table. I get the Ka0s down turn 2, hit them, get the 3 treasures, and then I'm able to play a protected Magus of the Moon. And once again, against 2 4-color Nas decks and a Tivit, they didn't really have much they could do mana base wise. Now, the player who mulled to 4, Tremnek, they had a Wishclaw Talisman, which is like one of the best anti-Magus of the Moon cards, because at any point, they can just go 1 generic mana, go grab Dockside. But luckily, he had so few cards in hand that he couldn't like pay off for the Dockside yet, right? So I knew I had a little bit of time, which is why I kind of got aggressive with the Imperial Recruiter, and also they Gilded Drake once again the Crom, so they were swinging 7 in the air at me over and over again. So I knew I had to play aggressively. So I got to the point where the turn after I got the Magus, I played with 0 extra mana to spare. I played Imperial Recruiter right into the put Imperial Recruiter right into Glinthorn. There was an Archivist in the battlefield. There was a Crom in the battlefield, so it gave them 2 draws, but none of them had the Force of Will, thank God, because had they had any colored mana, anything like that, one of them even had a Daze, but all of his islands were mountains. So yeah, crazy stuff. I was able to squeak out the win by hitting them in the face with Glinthorn, starting the Glinthorn combo, and just winning from there. So I can't believe I scraped back from the bottom of this tournament, and I am now headed, I believe, into the top 16. And once again, if you hear from me in like 20 minutes and I look frustrated and sad, it's because I didn't make the top 16. But I would be exceptionally surprised if that was the case. But yeah, so I'll see you all, hopefully, to tell you how my top 16 match went. Well, if you've been watching so far, you will know I did make top 16, as I have not come to you with a sour expression on my face. Ended the Swiss in 12th, which is not bad for someone who started the first 3 rounds without a win, but pretty happy about the progress of the tournament, pretty happy with how the deck turned out, especially towards the end. Was a grueling semifinals match. So it was, in first was Kenrith Turbo Nas mid-range list. In second was Wounded Satellite, who's known for playing Kinnan, playing his Kinnan list. After that was me on Malcolm Ka0s, and last was a Blue Farm player. I had to mulligan all the way down to 4, but it was a cracked 4. So I had Jewel Lotus, Land, Mana Crypt, and a Sensei's Top. So like pre-game, we had been joking about me mulling to 4, and my opponents were like, oh yeah, you're gonna get the Jewel Lotus and the Mana Crypt. And I think that conversation was sort of like, I feel like that conversation elevated the reasoning for when I went to play my Malcolm. I got Mind Break trapped, which was not great. I'm not gonna lie, it did not feel good in that time. Luckily, it didn't like completely ruin my game, but I was out of it for a little while. The game started to turn into a bit of a slog. It was very clear very early on that Wounded Satellite was going to go for a Basalt line and Kinnan. He went for it while the Blue Farm player was less available on resources, and then in response, Kenrith flashed in Ad Nauseam, was able to get a Force of Will to counter the Basalt Monolith, but it was very clear that he was about to win the game. You know, talking with him afterwards, he thinks he dug a little too deep with that Nas and was able to hit Emil and a few other things. So between he and I, Kinnan and I ended up killing him, taking him out of the game. There was also Just Ice, who had won the last Chaos and has performed pretty well in a couple of the tournaments recently, who's playing this Kenrith Nas list. But yeah, so he was out of the game pretty early on, and then it sort of became a slugfest between Kinnan, myself, and Blue Farm. I was pretty behind because I was still trying to dig. I got a Nezahal, which is basically the only reason I was in the game in any sort of capacity, because I was hellbent for a while just digging with top until I could find some sort of card advantage. Nezahal performed extremely well. I do think it was fed pretty aggressively throughout the game, if I'm being honest. The game slugged out for a while, and Orcish Bowmasters came down, which really changed the tempo of the game a considerable amount. And then we got to a position where, as I said, I was kind of on the back foot for a majority of it, just starting from, you know, going to 4 and then still having one of my spells counter pretty early on. And the ending of the game really relied upon Kinnan had, I think, 13 cards in hand, and I had taken control through a Gilded Drake of the Bowmasters. Kinnan had offered to use his Homeward Path to give the Bowmasters back to the Blue Farm player. And I was kind of talking between the two players while they were trying to navigate this deal, and Kinnan, who was at 5, or I believe 10 before he took his crypt and his One Ring damage, was like, okay, look, I can give you back your Bowmasters, but you can't target me at all with the ability, and you can't swing in at me in your next combat. So I was kind of going back and forth being like, why would you offer this deal to the blue farm player? Like, they're clearly going to run away with this game if you do that. And then I looked at the blue farm player and I was like, hey, the fact that they're offering this deal, I think they know what they're doing, which means that there's some sort of caveat here and they're worried about you killing them in response. And I got to a point where I looked at both of them and I said, I don't think either of you should want this deal. And if you do want this deal, it's because you're trying to win. Then that sort of, they were just like, yeah, sure, let's make the deal happen. Kinnan was able to untap and draw a bunch of cards and end up winning the game, unfortunately, because that deal had happened. And we were a little too late on some of the interaction to be able to catch up with the fact that Kinnan once again had like 13 cards it was able to combo off. So it was rather unfortunate ending that it ended with a deal that I thought was pretty bad to make in the first place. But it's part of the competitive nature of the format. You know, I respect the fact that once again the player held their word. I get that part of it, but it was definitely not great being in the seat in between those two players in by far the worst position and having to navigate the fact that they were making this awful deal with one another. It was tough, but I'm glad I was able to get another top 16 with Malcolm Ka0s. For you at home, interested to hear your thoughts on this tournament, interested to hear anyone's perspective. If you're any of the players, love to hear from your comments down below. If you're interested in videos like this, please let me know in the comments, because this is the first time we've really done anything like this on the channel. We've done some summaries beforehand, but definitely not summaries that I'm giving y'all the day of. I mean, I literally would finish my rounds and just hit record here on OBS. So let me know if you guys like these, or if you want something a little bit different, if there's any adjustments you guys think I should make while going through these, or if you want me to just go back to doing this on Twitter and worry about other stuff later. But I hope y'all enjoyed it. If you're watching this video the week it's released, I am currently, or I should be returning from Florida like right about now. So I'll probably unavailable for a lot of these comments, especially when that video drops right away. But hope you all enjoy this. Hope you guys have an amazing week. Let me know once again if you enjoy this type of video in the comments down below. Hit like and subscribe, and if you're interested in helping out the channel, check out patreon.com/ComedIanMTG, where you can have amazing tiers, some of which including our coaching, which is something we offer here at Comedian MTG even outside of the Patreon. And as I mentioned in my last video, we have a new type of coaching coming out in which people will be able to play games, get feedback, stuff like that, and I'll be releasing an entire video about that specific new coaching format coming out very soon, probably in the early weeks of September, when I can finally sit down and get that running when I'm not traveling like 8 different times this month. But hope y'all enjoyed this, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.
I can feel the blood creeping up from the heathens. Got will, got fight, got pride, got reason. If they wanna go eat, then you know I'm gonna feed them. If you're coming for me, hope you're ready for a demon. I got eyes in the back of my head, I'm seeing. Take me for granted.